the Radisson Gurgaon, sit in the lobby and drink water and green tea. We didn't have an office, and we would meet the founders then. And I think what is interesting about those meetings was you're trying to judge founders if they can land customers, if they can inspire your early team members to join them, and then just scale. And not just from a technology lens. I mean, we're a tech VC, so you back either.
So, hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. So today we're joined by really epic guests. So this episode was like 2 years in the making, 2+ years in the making. And we're joined by Sanjay Nath, co-founder of Blume Ventures. So hi Sanjay. So could you just share a bit about your pre-Blume days and kind of leading up to Blume Ventures? That would be a great way to kind of start this podcast.
Sure. Roohi, thanks for having me on. And I know it's been difficult from both sides to plan, but happily we're both here. So, no, absolutely. I would say that, I'm an accidental venture capitalist, accidental VC, in the sense that I'm an engineer and an MBA, which is the traditional path. But I didn't chance upon investing till I was in my mid-30s. Right after business school, I went to, I spent about 10 years as management consultant, and I got my start thanks to the Mumbai Angels. So I would describe myself, of course, Karthik Reddy, co-founder partner, very well known as well. Similar background, and he has his own path, but both of us are more angels turned VCs versus, let's say, career VCs that started their own fund or operator VCs. So I would say we're more, in my case, I was more consultant plus angel turned VC. And for me, the interesting part was, I used to visit India a lot as an associate partner with IBM. I was looking at outsourced services. And I was really intrigued. One of the first companies I came across was InMobi. Naveen Tiwari, he and team spent time in the US. They studied there, worked with McKinsey and came back. And I was really intrigued by someone with that profile, not starting up, but starting up in India, coming back and starting up in India. So I said, hey, there's something interesting in the water here. I have always had a foot there and here. And I said, this is really worth looking into. This is the same time, Bazi had started and then got acquired by eBay. And there was just Redbus was acquired by Naspers. And I was really intrigued. I said, there's something happening in India. And that was the precursor. And both Karthik and I met. And in a sense, Blume was like an institutionalized approach to angel investing. What we were doing as individual angels, we said, can we kind of do it in a more platform-oriented way? And that was the start. So I'm talking about 2009-10, leading up to the formal launch of Blume 1 in 2010.
That's a pretty interesting journey that you've had, in a non-traditional kind of path, and you went from angel to VC. So just talk us through kind of some of your earliest examples of some founder meetings that you had and kind of contrast them with some of the recent ones. What kind of significant changes have you observed during this period? And if you could just touch on that, that would be really helpful for some future founders out there.
Absolutely. So, in our latest deck, in our latest framing of thinking, we have two buckets. One is like a founder bet, and one is a thesis bet, right? And the ideal framing or investment decision is where both of them mesh very well. But when we started, the thesis in one sense was India. The sub-thesis was, let's say 60% consumer, great startups built in India for India, and the others great startups built in Bangalore, Gurgaon for the world. That is pretty much stayed true. But there was no sub-thesis, there was no deep thesis. So those earlier founder meetings were really founders who can go after a large market. I mean, if you think about a typical investment lens, Roohi, you want a large TAM. I mean, you heard TAM and team, right? This sort of stands out. So very large market and a great team. And then, of course, what is so unique about the product. But at that time, we said, let's go through strong referrals. We would co-invest a lot with other angel groups. So I think one of the earliest meetings I remember, I'll give you two examples. We met Metal, Ketan and Tanmoy. They started it's interesting when you start, you always have a company and then you say formerly known as. So this is a company called Metal, which was acquired a couple of years ago by Mercer. Good acquisition, in the sub 50 mil, but about that range, so pretty healthy. And they were known as IndusLink, and they were basically taking an HR tech approach, just doing psychometric assessments. So I remember we didn't have an office. We would sit, this was Gurgaon, we would sit at the Radisson Gurgaon, sit in the lobby and drink water and green tea. We didn't have an office, and we would meet the founders then. And I think what is interesting about those meetings was you're trying to judge founders if they can land customers, if they can inspire your team members to join them, and then just scale. You don't have the thesis was basically enterprise tech. Another very interesting company was Carbon Free Solutions, and you may have heard of Anirudh and Pratik, who came straight out of IIT Kharagpur and had this interesting plan to capture carbon dioxide and use that for different purposes. Again, we met them. We really didn't have. There was no climate change. There wasn't any EV or carbon emissions plans, but we just liked the passion of these founders, and how they wanted to change the world. And we would always invest a smaller amount. I'm talking about just to give you a perspective, Roohi, the first fund was all of 100 crores, and our typical check sizes were 1 crore to 2 crores. We would take about anywhere from 8 to 10%. Just see how different the market is today. You can add $1 behind that and you'll barely get 10%. So it's very different market at 2000 level. But those are two examples. I think we tried to index on who we thought would become great founders.
Yeah, that's super interesting, kind of how you mentioned about in your earliest founder meetings, you were mainly looking at how they were able to land customers, how they were able to scale and other things like that. And so, like, compared to your now, like your recent ones, like, what have you seen that founders are doing better in terms of their pitches or in terms of the ability to attract these customers, to attract this talent? Like, what have you observed over this last few years of being in the industry?
So, great question. I think our startup ecosystem has evolved a lot. The venture ecosystem, of course, but also the actual startups. So I would say storytelling or pitching seems really trivial, but it's absolutely non-trivial. For example, I would say it's really easy to make a 45-minute presentation, but not easy at all to make a 30-second or a minute presentation. So I think one of the things that founders have gotten far better at is just telling the story, and not just from a technology lens. We're a tech VC, so you back either founders, teams that are using tech as an enabler, or the tech is really core. In a robotics company, tech is core. In a marketplace, tech is an enabler. And very often I would hear 10, 15 of those, it's a very tech-oriented pitch. And investors, the angel investor won't get it. Today, I think founders have become much better at telling the entire vision, the mission, and how they'll get there. So I think that's one example of evolution. I think you were also asking about an experience, which is more recent experience, which is interesting, or which is different. One comes to mind. My alma mater is BITS Pilani, in the north of India, New Delhi. And in our first one of the first companies we backed was Grey Orange Robotics, which basically does automated warehousing. Samay and Akash came out of BITS, brilliant. So this is, harking back to 2011, and very similar to Carbon Clean Solutions. We want to take on the world. But a more recent example from our fund 3 is Pixel. Again, happened to be juniors from BITS, my alma mater, and the college invited me back after 20 years to just come and speak. And I don't know how familiar you are with North India, but Pilani is not easy to get to at all. It's sort of oasis in the middle of the desert. In fact, the cultural festival is called Oasis. So it's like Rajasthan desert all around, and it's just it's 5 hours from Delhi, pretty tough to get to. So I went back to campus, and one of the student organizers said, there are about Sanjay, there are about 100 startups that want to meet you, and Sajid Pai had also come with me, my colleague, my fellow partner. And I said, well, I'm happy to chat with them. But if you want me to meet one-on-one, I'll just meet 5. And one of them was Aves and Kshitij at Pixel. And what really struck me was that these were students in the final year. So, all of like 20, 21 years old. And at that time itself, they incorporated the company, but that doesn't mean much. They were part of Texas, Los Angeles, which is the space accelerator, which is set up in collaboration with JPL and NASA. They had already onboarded a couple of angels who are space tech operators. One of their companies was acquired by Planet, somebody else was acquired by Google. And they'd managed to do this while they're still in their 4th year. And I was just blown away. I said, wow, not only is somebody passionate, but they're able to create a vision and then attract people to buy into that vision, right? So it was very unexpected in that sense, pleasantly unexpected. And I called one of my partners and I said, I said in Hindi, but I said, we should really do this deal. We don't like to call it deal. Let's say we should really go after this opportunity. Really interesting startup. And he says, all that sounds good, but there's a small problem. So what's the problem? He says, they're students, and that was really interesting. That shows how far the Indian startup ecosystem has come, where there's no age for entrepreneurship and innovation. So I think that is amongst many examples that stand out.
Yeah, Pixel Space sounds like an amazing company. Like, I think I've seen a few tweets or something about that company and what they're doing there. It just sounds so amazing. And so let's get into the hiring part. Like, I know this is like a kind of a deep dive episode on Blume, and to really help showcase the personality and the insights of the fund. So my next question is like more along the lines of like, can you recount an experience where a candidate truly impressed the Blume hiring team? And what actions or qualities kind of made them stand out?
So again, great question. I always feel that one of the most important parts of the interview, there are 2 important parts amongst many. One is the research that candidates do, and the second is the Q&A, at the end. I mean, I typically like to approach interviews. I have 2 interviews later this evening here in Mumbai, in Bombay. I like to approach it more like a discussion, right? Like a conversation, not an interview, not like a back and forth. And I think I've been going back to the experience. I think great preparation stands out, and just a lot of positive energy and interest that shows that they really want it. So in our process, we do a lot of case studies. So this was an experience where the candidate obviously cracked the case study, but it's more almost putting themselves. They put themselves in your shoes. You say, like, if you were fund manager for a day, what would you do? What are the risks? And they're almost like they're role playing that out. And, there are many examples I can think about, but I think the aspect of the experience is where I think the candidate approaches it like a conversation, almost like role playing, and almost like it's like your prime minister for a day, or your chief scientist for a day. What will you do? I think that stands out a lot. And I think very, not necessarily intelligent, there are a lot of intelligent people, but a lot of thoughtful questions at the end. And also with answers, it's interesting. Sometimes I like to ask some of these candidates back that, that's an interesting question. What do you think? And it's good to get a point of view, because I like to always say there are no right answers or wrong answers. So I can't think of one example, but I think these are the characteristics that stand out. I would say preparation, positive energy, and I'll say also, Roohi, that energy can't be fake, right? It has to be natural. You can tell, an experienced person can tell when it's genuine and natural versus when it's being put on.
I think those are some really interesting points, like approaching it like a discussion. Just to recap for the audience, approaching it like a discussion, the reputation and energy you bring to the conversation, and being very thoughtful in like how you're answering and how you're speaking with the other party. So my next questions are more along the lines of the culture that you built, and then we'll wrap it up, I guess, with some thoughts of yours on reflecting on the past decade, like what are you kind of looking forward to? And yeah, so let's get into first elaborations on the culture at Blume Ventures. Like, what qualities or experiences are essential for someone to become a part of your team? Like, hiring and culture kind of go hand in hand. So I wanted to kind of get your insights on that as well.
Sure. I'll preface that by saying I think we're one of the VCs, one of the few VCs. There are lots of, there may be a few others also, where we've indexed over indexed on content because we want to actually share a lot about like the question you asked with case examples, with insights through our other podcasts, through on the website itself, and we write also a lot, right? And you may have been following some of that. I mean, we have there's a Blume book, there are podcasts, there's a series, and we share a lot. So that's one. And I think you asked a really interesting question. We call, we internally we say, okay, what does it mean to be blooming? So Blume with a hyphenated and then a Y. And then, founders also called Blumeers, not bloomers, but Blumeers. And then we have Blume alums, just like what a McKinsey. I mean, if you think about affiliation, what is the pain of McKinsey looking at two stellar consulting firms? It is a network, right? Earlier, it would be called an old boys club, and let's call it a young girls club now. But essentially, it's an affiliation of like-minded people with like-minded values. And I would say what is, I'll give you a couple of keywords, that where we describe Blume culture. I would say there is a high degree of ownership and entrepreneurship, and I'll talk about those. I think those are very unique. Which is, be it owning a subsector, owning a platform function. A lot of the people come in and we say, hey, as part of the interview, if you ran this for a day, what would you do, right? But you're going to be reporting skip levels to two people. But if you're running it, how would you run it? So we're looking for that ownership. And you talk to people inside Blume, and everybody would, feels that because they're given that, they're empowered. And the second is also, I think, goes hand in hand is entrepreneurship, because it's interesting, Roohi. I mean, today we are a company, right? You're not just your organization, living, breathing. All people think, okay, venture investing is just about investing. You heard this line probably that the real hard work starts after you cut the check. In fact, I'll go back to a line about it's about culture, but it's also about the nature of what we do. One of the co-founders of a large tea shop said, I remember we were just starting Group, so I was in my late 30s, said, our business is fundamentally about four levers in the value chain. You're finding, grinding, minding, and harvesting. Think about those four. In VC, finding is very important because you're attracting the best founders both ways. Grinding is really fast, right? I mean, either it's a note with a safe note with a cap, or it's a price round. But the minding and harvesting are less glamorous. Nobody wants to do that, right? When you find that you do a deal and you want to find the next deal. But the minding, the work really starts after you cut the check. So the culture at Blume, going back to the question, is really that ownership and entrepreneurship has to come in because that's your sub portfolio. You're responsible for that, right? That's your baby, that's your family. You have to grow that company along. So I think that's a big part of the culture. And then I would say we're quite we value diversity not for the sake of, but diversity in terms of thinking, in terms of we have 3 offices. I spend most of my time in San Francisco. We like different thinking. We in the IC we don't not only like, but we don't want everybody else to agree. We want to encourage positive dissent and different thoughts. So I would say ownership, entrepreneurship, and is encouraging sort of diversity, including diverse thinking and mindsets and orientations.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned about content because I think Blume has really top tier content and they're really one of the best in the biz in India at least, and probably in the world maybe. And so let's discuss a bit now. Let's wrap it up with some of your reflections on the past decade from about 2011 to 2024 across 4 Blume funds. So what have been some of your learnings and what have been some of those things that you're like looking into in the next decade? And yeah, just if you could share that and then, yeah.
Sure. I will say that this is a very, very long-term game. All of us on Twitter, we are just, they're playing for the long game. And if you think about it, I'll give you a stat. I think the reflections on the past 10 years is that it is indeed a long game. There's a statistic that shows that the companies that got to a billion ARR, $1 billion of ARR, which is a very steep target, of course, right? I mean, very few companies meet that. Typically take an average of like 11 and a half years to reach it. Even if you took 100 mil ARR, it takes a long time. So I think one realization is a very long-term game, which means that everybody, if you look at use a Shakespearean analogy, that everybody on the stage, from the co-founders to the early hires, to board members, to investors, to customers, have to be prepared and engaged for that. And also the VC team, I mean the Blume team. So I think that's one realization. The second is that the power law holds. So I think we see the realization over 10 years is there's a balance between you shouldn't have favorite children, right? To use that analogy, but the power law does hold, and it's held for 50 years for the biggest brands in the business, and now even us, where you have to quickly realize where your top value drivers are going to come from, right? I'm talking about the business of which you're investing. And then you have to have a big realization that you have to have enough dry powder to go after those, which is why you're seeing, Roohi, you're seeing growth funds, right? You see add-on funds, you see sidecar funds, you see opportunity funds. People sometimes call them continuity funds. And that is because, when you find you find your Uber or whichever the company is going to break out, you have enough dry powder. So I think that's a big realization. We always knew that, but it becomes even starker. And to your next question about in the next 5 years, or let's say till 2030, I think we are a fund that is straight through to our playbook. And what I mean by that is, you remember when we started this podcast, this interview, we've always believed about 60%, 2/3 is innovation that's backing great founders building from India for India. So this is Unacademy, Turtlemint, Purplle, Slice, and Cashify, great founders like this. And then you have the other side, which is built from Gurgaon, Bangalore for the world, which is Grey Orange, Pixel, Lambda Test, Tricog, and Sprinto, and so many other companies like this. More recently, Atomic Work and Sift Hub. So we've stayed true to that. I think that will stay. That playbook will stay the same. I think you asked what will be different. The AI revolution is real. We are spending so I should mention, we talked about content, we've become far more thesis driven. I'll give you a good example. Just for example, like our thesis on SaaS earlier was, built in Bangalore for the world. And then it became, we do SaaS and we do deep tech. So that got bifurcated in two. Now within SaaS, it's Arpit, my colleague, at deep tech, fellow partner. Within SaaS, now there's application there, horizontal, vertical. There is dev and tooling. There's infrastructure. There's cybersecurity. That itself, the thesis have more into sub-thesis. So we're very excited about this. I think AI is more like a horizontal layer, but we're also very excited about core, like in India, in the Roti Kapda Makan, which is healthcare. For example, we've got Healthify Me in that. Financial services, we've got Slice and Turtlemint in that. And then you have, of course, EdTech, Unacademy, Classplus, leverage, so many other startups in that. So I think that the theses have become sharper. We have more sub-theses now. And the last thing I'd say, what I'm really excited about, Roohi, is about just the youth of India, about the talent. I mean, I speak a lot at conferences, at Columbia and UCLA, Berkeley. And earlier, this was not the case. I find grads coming up to me and saying that, what are the opportunities? Is Blume hiring in India? I have portfolio companies hiring in India. So I think with this youth very, very open to, they're becoming more global minded. They might go abroad to study, but they want to come back and they actually want to make an impact. That is really exciting to me. So I'm very excited by their being excited about startups.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting that you mentioned about how students are wanting to come back and build in India as well. I think that's also a trend that we're seeing, that people want to build in India. They want to go abroad, but they also want to build in India as well. And so my next thing and the last thing I wanted to say is, just share with the audience like how they can get in touch with Blume Ventures, how they can find out more about what you guys are building, and how they can get in touch with you as well, like to learn more and discuss maybe some ideas they might have or anything they want to share. Like now's your stage.
Absolutely. So I would say, we're we have a very active website. I'm on Twitter. Nowadays, I am, doing a lot of retweeting and amplifying. I'd love to get back to writing, but, our colleagues, I think Sanjay writes a lot, and Blume Ventures also has its own handle. So I think one is Twitter. LinkedIn, of course, is another great way. I bump into, a lot of people bump into me at airports and other places like that. And, I think this is a people business, right? I want to put that, this is a people and relationships business. So, of course, we want to be approachable. It's not like, we're sitting on a pedestal or platform, but I think LinkedIn and I think Twitter are good ways. And I would honestly, candidly tell entrepreneurs who want to get funded, people say it matters who you know, but it does matter, but with more context. If you get someone to refer you, why does that work the best? That means that the person who's referring you, either as an angel or someone to Blume, is putting his or her name on the line, right? They put their neck on the line. And that is very important because essentially you're vouching for somebody to say, hey, this is not a casual intro. This is somebody that you might back that wants to build a business for 10 years, for 15 years. This is not like a hi, hello. It's a very going back to the long-term game. So I strongly encourage founders who are looking to get funded from Blume. Of course, you can approach directly, but there's nothing like getting a warm referral from somebody who is vested in your interests and also who is connected to you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that kind of last nugget about like approaching the Blume team, like what's the best way. And yeah, it was an absolute honor and a